Hi, my name is Martin and I'm an alcoholic. So the purpose of this video is to describe what this is all about, who I am, what I do, why I'm doing this, and what to expect. I'd first like to state that I don't represent or speak on behalf of any 12-step fellowship or group, even though I did get sober in one, and do currently attend meetings and do service in groups. I will share my experience on my journey before getting to that point and after, up until today, or up until the present time. One of the things I've been taught on how to stay sober is to pass on what I've learned, to carry the message, to help others stay sober, and in doing so, I stay sober. So that is the reason I do this. I don't do it for profit motive. I don't do it for recognition. I don't do it for popularity. I do it to stay sober. And there is a certain sort of power that I feel inside of me, a feeling of well-being and a feeling of being useful in life, in being able to pass on this information that was so freely given to me. The reason behind not being able to see my face is included in one of our videos in the traditions. It does explain that alcoholics are not very good at being famous for being sober, and it is described as one of the important things that we, I suppose, need to adhere to in order to safeguard or guarantee our sobriety. And that is the reason. It's not that I'm ashamed of being an alcoholic in recovery or anything like that. It is that I am here to carry the message, and that is all. There is no other motive. So some of the things I will go through is, parts of my journey, what I was like. Before I got sober, I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I remember growing up in a family where there was a lot of heavy drinking being done by members in the household, my father especially, and I suppose, being quite, in some ways, affected by that, of course, growing up in a household where there was a lot of drinking being done, and certain levels of dysfunction. And I remember seeing alcohol as some sort of mystical thing that could take you to almost another place. And I was a kid who never felt, I felt like there was something missing, that I was born, missing some vital component that everybody else seemed to have. I wondered if I was adopted, or that people didn't love me. I always had this sort of feeling that my family just didn't love me, and there was no real evidence to back that up, but that was the sort of feeling that I always had. And I remember always wanting to escape, wanting to run away, or wanting to do things that would make me not be in reality. And that was one of my biggest problems. I didn't like what reality had to offer. So I lost myself in innocent ways to escape. I would read a lot of books, like a lot, to the point where I would just get lost in the storylines and the characters, and the imagination that I had would definitely, take me away to another place. And of course, it definitely, doesn't bring it to the point where other things do, like alcohol. But I remember eventually getting to the point, where I did drink, and I remember at the time I drank enough to get drunk. I was brought to a nightclub with my older brother, and I drank alcoholically for the very first, from the get-go. Coming into AA, it was explained to me that we suffer from what they describe as a physical allergy. Once we put alcohol into our body craves more, and we just keep on putting it into our bodies until we have to stop, for whatever reason. We might get sick, or we might run out of money, or there's none left, or whatever. And I remember, these guys were nursing beers. They were older guys, and I just, drank so much so fast that, I was drunk and, incapacitated, and they had to take me home, within an hour or two or something. And they put me to bed, and I fell asleep, of course. And many hours later, they came back, after having a long night out and having some food afterwards, and having the post-night talks and laughs and going to bed and falling asleep. And I woke up. I remember waking up and feeling powerful, knowing now that I was drunk. And I remember climbing onto the roof of the house, which was, almost 2-story, and being out on the windowsill, totally fearless. And I loved that feeling, because I was a kid that was so full of fear. And that's what alcohol did for me. It took the fear away. It almost like it gave me superpowers. And I rode that feeling, almost into the gates of hell, eventually. And that was it. It could take away the fear and let me do things that other people seem to do with ease. Like talking to somebody I was attracted to, dancing in public, singing in public, in front of other people. I could do neither of those 3 things ever well, but I could do them. I could do them without feelings of embarrassment, shame, or fear. And alcohol did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And that was it. It became my best companion. My whole life was built around it. Which industry I worked in, who I hang around with, who I dated, which cities, which countries I moved to, which suburbs I lived in, which bars I went to, which people I surrounded myself with. Looking back, it was not done consciously a lot of the time, but looking back, it was almost like the disease of alcoholism was in the driving seat all the time, and I was under the illusion that I was making the decisions. But my life was centered around it. And eventually things started to suffer in a way that the consequences became quite serious. There was consequences from almost the beginning. I would be brought home by the police for being caught underage drinking. There would be incidents in which I would be displaying antisocial behaviour, and getting caught for it. Jobs just seem to always disappear as a result of not being able to show up on Mondays, or just not being able to have decent relations with colleagues or bosses. Always being underslept and undernourished, or malnourished perhaps, never helped. And I think I lost most jobs in my life as a result of drinking. Every relationship I ever had was the same. Once I put alcohol into my body, all bets were off as to what my behaviour was. I had had no control over the amount that I would take. Almost never. You know, if somebody asked me, how many beers are you going to have tonight? You know, 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I would say I'd be going for 4, and 1 out of 10 times I would have 4. But the rest, even if I said I'm only going for 1, or if I'm only having 3, you know, I could come back 3 days later, you know, wearing the same clothes, you know, and I didn't know. I didn't know when I was going to stop. I had very little control over the amount I would take. And when I would try to stop for good, which I did many, many times, and I don't mean like trying to stop for a week or a month. When I would actually say, you know, I can't ever drink again. You know, I knew I had a problem with drinking. When I would try to stop for good, I was not able to. And you know, by the time I got to the age of 18, you know, I had a pretty good idea I was alcoholic. I didn't know what an alcoholic truly was, but you know, growing up in Ireland, we had many of them, and I knew that I didn't drink like normal people. I knew that there was something in me that was in those other guys who put alcohol before everything. I left school early, you know, moved out of the area that I grew up in, and you know, ended up moving to a lot of different places, you know, and everywhere I went, my behaviour stayed the same, so the problems never stopped. And I remember living in New York at the age of 23, and I remember saying to a friend of mine who was not an alcoholic, and I said, I've got a serious problem with alcohol and I can't stop. And I was at a very low point in my life, and she said to me, there's another Irish guy here, and he was much worse than you, and he went to AA, and now he's been sober for 6 years. And that kind of planted a seed in me that there was an alternative, that there was hope. And I remember we looked up the meetings. We looked up the meetings in where we were in Maspeth and Queens, and the meeting was almost just about to finish, but there was one the next day, and she asked me if I'd be willing to go to the meeting the next day, and I said of course I was. But the issue was, you know, those windows of opportunity are so slim of when we're actually willing to go and get help. You know, when it's so painful that we're willing to go and take that leap. When the next day came, I didn't feel as bad, and I never went to that meeting, but little did I know that there's meetings almost around the clock in New York, and if I had moved one suburb or got the train into Manhattan, life could have been a lot different. But I don't regret not getting in earlier, as you know, I believe that life was supposed to take the path it did, and I'm very grateful that I did get in eventually to recovery, and my life changed as a result. So fast forward from that time, I would say about 4 years, and I was living in Australia, and I had been recently married, and my ex-wife's father was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was a fantastic human being who I loved very much, and you know, he was an alcoholic in my ex-wife's during my ex-wife's childhood, and behaved like a lot of alcoholics do. And you know, he wasn't the guy that I met. He was a totally different guy. He was the guy who I would have aspired to be in life. He was funny and charming and creative, and you know, he was a wonderful guy. And the only thing that had really changed was that he went to AA, and something happened and kind of it built on that story that I heard in New York, that maybe something happens there that changes human beings. And I had tried to stop drinking on my own limited power for a long time, on and off. I would either be trying to stop drinking or be trying to control my drinking, or just drinking and trying to accept the situation that I had a problem with alcohol, and just to accept that and try and make the best of life. And it just never was enough. I knew that the only way that I could have any sort of peace of mind or serenity or any sort of well-being was I needed to attain complete abstinence, and that's not something I was able to do on my own. So eventually, things had to get a lot worse before I would get into that place again where I would really want to go and get help. And it was 3 years later. I'd lost my marriage at this point. I'd lost a business. My physical health had deteriorated. I was being hospitalized regularly. And you don't have to have any of these things to be an alcoholic, but if you're an alcoholic for long enough, chances are that they may occur. And the rate of progression of the illness in people are different. People come in barefoot and homeless at the age of 14. Some people don't come in until they're 70 or 80 years old. And that's the thing with alcoholism and the consequences that sometimes come with that, is that they're different in everybody, and it doesn't make anybody more or less alcoholic, just the rate of progression is very different. And as it was in me, it works differently, at a different pace in all of us. And I got to that point, my mental health, in addition to my physical health, was almost destroyed. I was, depressed from a very, very young age, and drinking to the, to excess definitely does not help that. I was suffering from anxiety most of my life, and that was just continually getting worse and worse and worse. The panic attacks had begun, and it was at the point where the panic attacks had gotten so bad that my work was starting to say that there is an issue here, and that it looked like perhaps I would be looking at maybe losing my job as a result of the unmanageability that came with that. And it came to the point where I was having them in my sleep. I would wake up having a panic attack, which in my mind at the time was my only respite. Sleeping was the only time. I never had panic attacks. And I remember waking up with one day, and it was definitely not the worst thing that ever happened to me on my journey by a long shot, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I was at a point where the one thing that would have given me relief in my life, alcohol, had not only stopped giving me that relief that I looked forward to, or that I hoped that it would still give me, but it was making me worse instead of better. And so my medicine had stopped working, and I was so depressed and at times suicidal that I wanted to kill myself, but had not the courage, thankfully. And the third option was AA. And one of my local AA meetings, one of the nearest, was in a psychiatric hospital, and I walked in, hoping they'd lock me up, that they'd give me a straitjacket, a bottle of pills and a diagnosis, and tell me how to get better. But it was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. They just told me to keep coming back, and they were all almost saying the same thing, and something, whatever they said there that day, which I can't really remember, it made me come back to my second meeting. And the more meetings I went to a lot of meetings during that time, and they were all saying the same thing. I could understand that these people drank like me. These people had the same experiences, the same feelings. Some of our stories were different in some ways, but I knew that we were inside the same. We were drinking to feel, or we were drinking to not feel. We were trying to get rid of something, or we were trying to attain something through alcohol. And these guys came to AA and they got well. They looked well. They sounded well. As well as I wanted to be, but could never have gotten to on my own resources. So I stuck around, and I suppose that feeling of searching for a solution for so many years and not knowing what it was, and finally feeling like I found it, brought such great relief. And the problem was I mistook that relief for recovery. The more meetings I went to, and the more I heard these stories, the more I seen these people who looked and sounded well, the more I knew I was in the right place, and the more relief I got, and the more, the better I felt. But there was a lot of stuff that I wasn't prepared to do. I remember looking up on the wall and seeing the 12 steps, and there was so much God written in there, and that's all I could really see. And I bristled with antagonism at the even seeing that word. Growing up religious and having pushed God out of my life, or the God idea. And I wasn't open to having any sort of spiritual solution in my life. I wasn't willing to do anything that they were doing to get well. And I was that kind of guy. I was a guy who took shortcuts. I wanted what you had, but I wasn't willing to do what you did to get it. That was the sort of guy that I was. And eventually it didn't work out. I ended up relapsing, and then coming back knowing that there have been a lot of things that these people have been doing to stay sober and to get to that place. And in order for me to get well, to have that life that they had, I needed to do what they did. And that's what I did. I went through the 12 steps. I had to ask somebody for help, which was very, very difficult for me. I had been self-sufficient for a long time, with no great results, and asking for help was so difficult. But eventually I did. I went through the processes that they had gone through, and my life turned out to be very, very different. I remember, fast forward 4 years, I was living in a different country, working in a different industry, speaking a different language, and being in a relationship that was beyond my wildest dreams. And at the time that behaving in a way that I didn't know I was capable of as a human being. And that was where my life ended up, as a result of doing what other people did, admitting that I don't have all the answers, and that maybe somebody else does, and to ask them, what do I need to do to get well? What do you do? Being honest, open, and willing, and being teachable. That was one of the great things that I had to apply to my own being in order to get well. And my life got infinitely well, and it continues to do so. So that is really in a nutshell what has happened. So what we're going to be doing, or what I'm going to be doing on this channel, is sharing as much of the material that helped me get sober and stay sober. I read some of the books that helped contain the solution of the program of action that saved my life and made things infinitely better. They would detail the 12 steps that helps get people sober, and keep them sober, and also the 12 traditions that keeps these groups intact through time, to stop them from not being there for the future generations that are ahead of us that may need the help. I read books and share my own experience in relation to the passages included in the book, and that's something I'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. In future videos I will be speaking on certain topics that are common in recovery, and reading some important pamphlets that answer some of the common questions about Alcoholics Anonymous and the groups. what they are, what they're not. Anonymity, sponsorship. Do I have to believe in God? Does it cost money? And lots more other questions that we tend to have and are unanswered. I will be uploading a short 1 minute reading every day. It's something that I've done since I've come in, that I read some literature in relation to recovery every day in the morning, and it's something that I can share with all of you. So I'll do that every day, and I'll do a longer video every Saturday. So that's my aim, and I'll try to stick to it as best as I can. Please like and comment on the video if you find it satisfactory. Feel free to comment with any suggestions on topics to talk about that are related to recovery. Please do. In the meantime, hit that red subscribe button at the bottom of the screen and hit the bell if you're on YouTube, and if not, you can head to the YouTube channel Get Sober with Martin. In the video description, you'll see the links to subscribe. Also, you can hit the link if you can't see the red subscribe button, and there's also links in there to my TikTok, Twitter and Instagram, so make sure to visit and say hello. It's been really good to have you on here, and thanks for stopping by. Have a good day. Bye bye.